Tonight, we were talking a little bit about getting started on a project, and one of the things that is just an incredible gift from Larry is his preliminary notes. I hope you guys have gotten this.
Incoherent scribblings. Or
No,
It's
I
the
mean,
opposite. I mean, we were saying to each other over dinner, these are like a lesson in how to write a pilot. I mean, I really think that.
well, I also said, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I probably won't. I've seen two other treatments. This was so clearly described. It made me think of two other treatments I saw. The one-page description of I Love Lucy, which was exactly what the show was. It's at Universal. They've got like this little Lucy museum, and you would not believe it lays out the entire series. And the Mary Tyler Moore outline. And this is so clearly laid out. It's just
good company. Wow.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
good company. It's good company. You know, you should have won an Emmy for this.
No, he. Oh, duh,
Irony.
duh.
So,
But you guys got these notes, right?
no?
No.
Oh.
They're available where? In the library or right here?
What?
Oh, I thought we were
This
handing
is
this
crazy.
out.
What a rinky-dink
I'm so-
organization.
I'm sorry
we're
about
running.
that. Oh, that's a great idea. You
Yeah.
know what? You want me to go and see?
Yeah. Thanks. Well, they have copies. I don't know why they're not up here. But so Larry, if you don't, I'd love to start out just with sort of the overview. I mean, I want to go through this whole thing, but about how you came to work with Bernie Mac. So why don't we start with that?
Okay. Actually, it was two different ways. I was doing a show called the PJs. It was an animated show on Fox. Steve Tompkins and I co-created it. And we used to have to go to wherever Eddie was to record him. We'd record the whole cast, at the studio, and then wherever Eddie was, we'd just have to hunt him down and bring a tape recorder and just record him,
That sounds like a show in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd go up to Sacramento, we'd go out to his house in New Jersey sometimes. And sometimes we'd just have to go to a movie set, and just kind of sit around, in his trailer and just wait for him to come in, and then we'd record him. It was really bizarre. So once we were on the set of Life, he was doing that movie, we're waiting there, and I told Steve, I said, I'm not waiting in this trailer, man. I'm going to just walk around. We just started walking around, and Bernie Mac was outside of his trailer waiting to do a shot or whatever. And I was a big fan, I went over and said, hey, Bernie, how's it going? We talked for a while. And Bernie's always like, hey, man, how you doing, man? I was like, how's it going? Bernie said, Larry, I'm just happy, man. Things are great, man. They are great, And I was just so taken aback by how positive he was. No matter what I asked, he was like, Larry, it is fair. I got nothing to complain about. No, I am blessed, It was real old school, almost Southern kind of charm, And I was like, man, Bernie is cool. And I told him, I said, Bernie, I would love to write something for you sometime. I said, Larry, that would be great, man. I would love that. I would love that. Yeah, and he said he was going to be at the Universal Amphitheater like the next month. And I was thinking, I think he thinks I want to write his stand-up. I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to write something for him, And so he invited me to come to the show, and I think I didn't go because I didn't want to give the wrong impression or whatever. But I thought, when
Wrong
I have
impression that you were interested in,
right, in his stand-up.
or his life.
I'm not interested in that. But plus, I couldn't write his stand-up better than he can. I mean, that stuff was great. But so a couple of years later, I met him again when I pitched the show to him.
So you pitched the show to him.
Right.
And what was
Oh,
what was
wow.
his stand-up? Because I've never seen his stand-up. So there was none of this family stuff in the...
Well, in his stand-up, he did a joke about taking care of his sister's kids. And they were real little, the kids in his stand-up. And one of them, he said, one of them was a faggot. He's talking, I was milking cookies. And he was doing the kids stealing cookies and all this stuff. And
So he really did raise his sister's
he
kids?
didn't. He only raised one of them, I found out later. It was a girl. And so the circumstances weren't quite that. He just embellished it. He just thought it would be funnier with more kids, And he thought it would be
And
funnier.
one of them would be a faggot.
Exactly.
That's
exactly,
always funny.
exactly, right. And
That's are funny.
Yeah, and then they have to steal cookies if that's the case. But and I guess he thought it'd be funnier if they were little, you know. But I think she was a little older at the time, and I think she lived with him just a short amount of time. It wasn't that long, but it was enough to give him the joke in his act, you know. And he started doing it in his act, and then it just grew and grew and grew until it became this big bit. But anyway, when I saw it, I was meeting with a company at the time. They were interested in writing a movie for the Kings, you know. They thought, hey, we should get, it was before the movie Kings of Comedy came out, and they showed me the movie to see if I would have any idea. They said, this is about to come out, and we know it's going to be big, and if you have a movie idea for them, it would be good to get them together now before, you know, somebody doesn't want to work with somebody else. Was pretty much how they were putting it. I mean, that's how it goes, right? And when I watched it, I just couldn't take my eyes off of Bernie, you know, and I was like, man, you know. And he was like daring everybody in the audience. I don't know if he said, I dare you to give me a TV show. Y'all afraid of me, you know. And I just, you know, and when I saw Bernie's bit with the kids, it was just the funniest thing I had ever seen, you know, or at least in a long time. And at the time, I was also developing a TV show for Regency. And what I had come up with, I wanted to do something that was different. I was kind of tired of the same rhythm in comedies, you know, the three-camera sitcom with the boom, 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 or as Gary Marshall would say, Laverne comes in, joke. She walks to the refrigerator, joke. Shirley walks out of the bedroom, joke. Lenny and Squiggy come in, joke, boom, boom, and you're out, you know. I mean, that's how Gary Marshall was brilliant, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but
you
know,
reflected that immediately. You said, this isn't going to be that rhythm.
Exactly. So the biggest thing I wanted to do a show that really felt real. It was the authenticity of how it felt was what I was going for. And what inspired me, and this is before I even thought of doing it with Bernie, the first idea for the show was, I had that in mind. Survivor had just come on that summer, and you know, I just wanted to do something different. And so I had my agent send me like 10 episodes of The Real World or something like that. And I was watching them over and over, and I was going, what is it about this? What's going on here? And I was watching, I remember there was one I was watching the act break. And I was like, why do I want to come back after the act break? There was no like, dun, 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 dun. I mean, there was nothing like that. There was no plot point that was compelling me to come back, but I wanted to come back. And I was like, why? Why is that? You know, and I kept playing it over and over. And I was like, why do I want to keep coming back? I don't get it, you know. And I realized that it had nothing to, and I was saying why, because I wanted to find out what in the story is making me come back, you know. And I realized that it wasn't anything that was really going on. I was just interested in the people. It was their lives I wanted to see more of. In other words, I wanted to see more discoveries about them, you know. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That would be cool to write like that. Instead of writing to a particular plot cliffhanger, write to an emotional cliffhanger or discovery about a person. That right to a point where something opens a door where I want to find out more about them, of what's going on. So, and that kind of was my starting point for the show. I thought, wow, that's kind of cool, you know, if I tried to construct a show like that, where the plot wasn't important, the story became the more important thing.
And that's what I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love your work. And before you came, we were talking about Romy and Michele a little bit, but I never thought, I mean, there's a few things in there that are jokes or, you know, but they're not really jokes because it's funny only because those characters are saying it. And it really comes out of comedy. And that's really why I loved it. But it was so interesting that you just knew what you wanted to do and laid it out. And I was fascinated. I mean, I'm so addicted to reality shows. You know, that's the sad thing.
Right.
Yeah, me
And
too.
and I've
okay, Winnie.
wondered about the same thing. Now, did you actually watch Big Brother? I have to ask that.
I watched it for research. I watched like 2 episodes, and I heard it was real big in England, but it just didn't do much for me. I found Survivor a little more interesting because the people were so mean-spirited on it, you know. But
You
and
somehow let that filter into you.
Yeah.
And it's not like if someone was watching your pilot, they'd go, oh, he's imitating Survivor.
Right. Well, another show that was even more influential was a show called 1900 House. Did anyone see that?
Oh, was
Yeah,
that like, and that was like Colonial House and Frontier House?
Absolutely, it was
Oh
fantastic.
my God, I love
Yeah,
those.
1900 House was it was more influential than Survivor actually because
Oh, I haven't seen the 1900
yeah, it was very
House.
authentic. It was this English family. They lived in a house that was from 1900, and they had to do everything like it was 1900. And they had cameras set up all in the house, and they had a confessional camera that you would go in and say things that you didn't want to say around the family, and they would confess things to us.
Were they 1900 cameras?
Yes, exactly. It was only subtitles, right? And it cost a nickel. I ran out of money by the time it was over. But yeah, I just couldn't get enough of it. It was so interesting. But it was, once again, it was their lives that was fascinating to me. It was how they were interacting. You know, the conflicts that were going on with them. All emotional stuff. You know, no plot type stuff, right? There was no what's going to happen in the end here. You know, I just wanted more, you know. And that was the most influential. It's funny that I didn't write that down, but that was 1900 Houses in my head more than anything at the time. But so my first idea was to rig a real house with cameras and do that kind of thing and kind of shoot a sitcom like that.
Right.
And so some of my early meetings with the Regency people about it was that. But then I saw the Bernie Mac thing. I thought, wow, if I put Bernie's story into this concept, that's a real nice emotional thing to pull us in. If you know from the beginning that Bernie's sister is on drugs, is on crack, and he has to take care of the kids, wow, now I'm with you. Like there's a part of me that's gonna go with you and kind of, I might feel sorry for those kids or I'm interested in this story. I wanna see what's gonna happen. And I thought that would be a great hook to hook us in emotionally where I would be able to buy everything from the audience. I'd be able to get away with this because we'd be emotionally invested, you know.
I mean, I'm realizing now as you're saying it that what's worked so well with his personality is that then he's free to be as mean as he wants and as gruff as he
exactly
wants
right.
because he's done this heart-opening thing.
That's right.
So it's like
That's exactly
you
right.
freed
right.
him. You
right.
freed the beast.
And I knew I had to have that, you know.
Right.
For him to act like that, he had to be doing this great thing, you know. And so when those two came together, I felt I had a show. And I remember calling Pete Aronson, and I said, Pete, I have this great idea for a show. And he goes, Larry, wait, don't say anything. Bernie Mac. I just saw Kings of Comedy. I said, no, Pete, that's what I got. I want to do murder. And I pitched him the show. He said, Larry, stop thinking of ideas. That one's great. And he called Bernie and set up a meeting. I pitched it to Bernie, and he liked it. And then we pitched it to Fox, and it went.
That's so fascinating because Winnie and I were wondering how much of it was in his act, and also you did a lot.
Only the idea was in his act, yeah.
Right, the
But
idea of the kid.
But
The kids.
it's also, here he developed a show for a guy that didn't even know he was developing the show.
Sure, yeah.
But I'm guessing, but it seems obvious. He was in your head. Like you said, you were drawn to him immediately when you watched that movie of the Kings.
Right.
And there was something about him. There was something about him for you where you connected.
Well, the actual timing of it was I had to do a pilot for Regency, and so I thought of that form of that reality type thing, but I didn't have a story for it. I just thought of the form that I wanted to shoot a sitcom that felt real. Then I saw Kings of Comedy and thought, wow, Bernie's story inside of that form that I just came up with, that sounds like that would be great. So that was the sequence.
What I love about that is that so often I think when you're beginning something, it's like when worlds collide, like two elements come together and go, and you feel that little click in your head.
I'll tell you another thing. I wasn't even supposed to do this. I had a script deal with Regency the year before, and we had pitched a show to the WB or something like that, and it didn't go, and so I didn't get to even write the script. And then Gail Berman left. She was at Regency at the time and went to Fox, and my lawyer was just going to try to get me paid for the script anyway. You know, and I called him and I said, no, I don't want the money. I didn't do the script. I'd rather write the script. I want to get paid when I write something. And so he said, okay. You know, and then Pete Aronson came into Regency.
Okay, you and your integrity.
I know, but I wanted to write something, you know. That was the whole point.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't an overall deal. It was a script deal, you know. And then lucky for me, Pete Aronson, who I had known before, came into Regency and called me up and said, Wilmore, are you on the board here? Man, you're doing the script. And, Pete was just great. And luckily the timing worked out that was the thing, and it worked out.
So did there come a time when you then went in and just pitched to Bernie Mac?
Yeah. So we called Bernie, and some people were pitching to him at that time. And I pitched to him, and he really liked it a lot right from the beginning. And
He must have been charmed that you found this thing, that you pulled this nugget out of his act.
well, everybody was pitching stuff to him
Right.
at that time, because Kings of Comedy had come out by that time, and so people were pitching things to him. I don't know if anybody had pitched that part of his act to him. I think people were just pitching Bernie Mac, but I don't think anybody picked out that thing with the kids, because I think when I pitched it to him, he hadn't heard it yet.
Well, that's
Yeah.
always funny. I mean,
Like
I
he
hate
never
it.
considered that would be a show. Yeah.
No, but
Yeah.
but that's something that you can come back to. It's a situation that is going to grow over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a situation that's going to be replete with new stories.
Right.
I mean, that's what we always look for is
Right.
how. It's one thing to write the pilot, but where is it going to go?
Right.
And how am I going to keep? How is it going to evolve and yet
Right.
stay the same?
Right.
It
right.
can't evolve so much that the show becomes a new show.
Right.
It has to be that show, but it has
Oh.
to go somewhere.
But it's also really a lot easier, I think, to sustain something that's character based and not plot based
Right.
and not gimmick based. Larry, I mean, sure you do, but do you remember what?
And I did have gimmicks in the show, actually.
Well, you had the
Right.
titles and.
Well, you mean
but
the
that's
confession?
But it was put on the other stuff, right?
yeah, that you had the basis. What were the other big sitcoms at the time when you were developing this? Because it sounded like
Right.
you were reacting to something.
I was, yeah. The biggest show was probably Friends and Seinfeld at the time. Raymond was just starting to get kind of big. Frasier was still big. God, I think Will and Grace had just become a hit at the time.
So it was the rhythm that you
Right.
you just because I also I find that when hear that set up punchline thing, I just zone out. I mean, those shows that you mentioned were actually really good shows.
Yeah, they're excellent.
But there's
shows, yeah.
something about that. I hate a laugh track.
Mm-hmm.
I just hate it. I'm always wanting to do single camera because I feel like you can capture life so much more.
Right.
But then they still want to put a laugh track on it.
Right. See, my point of view is that I really don't mind it. I'm not. I just like it to be funny, to be honest with you. But but I'm also contrarian. If everybody's doing it, then I probably don't want to do it. It's kind of my nature. But the only other single camera show at the time I think was Malcolm in the Middle. That was it. So it was a big deal to do a single camera show.
And this was what year?
I wrote it in 2000.
2000.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think, well, nobody watched this show, but I'm trying to remember. I did a show called Grosse Point for the WB that Darren Star created, and I was the other executive producer. But I think that was around the same time. But
Yeah, and the last successful single camera sitcom I think was The Wonder Years.
yeah.
Before Malcolm in the Middle.
But
I'm
that
pretty
wasn't really
sure.
a comedy. I mean,
Well,
Well, it was.
it was
half hour,
funny, but
yeah.
it was to
was-
me it felt more like a drama with comedy than
Yeah.
a straight out comedy. Because Bernie Mac is a straight out comedy,
Yeah.
even though there's these moments. Now, did you have this stuff before you went to Bernie Mac, or you just had a?
Yeah.
Let's see. When I pitched it to Bernie, I had the real basic setup of it, nothing in detail. I knew that he would. His basic philosophy was that he viewed the kids as terrorists, and he does not negotiate with terrorists. That was the basic view of it. And
Pitch that to Bernie Mac.
absolutely, absolutely. And that was, to me, that's what the show was about. See, for me, part of my writing is when I know what the show's about, that's it. I hold on to it for dear life. I always tell writers that anything else is changeable, but when I know what the show is about, I hold on to that for dear life. That's what the show is about,
I mean, what we talk about a lot here, not to interrupt too much, but we talk a lot about like, well, how do you get to that?
Right.
And I know you famously said to Robin, was it to you, about how that when he's writing, he hates his life.
Well,
Because
that it just permeates.
I related to that.
Not that you hate it, but that it
Oh, maybe I
permeates
misquoted.
Right,
every aspect of your life,
Right.
whether it's going well or not.
right. It's a very painful process.
It is painful, but I mean, I
Right.
know it's an unanswerable question, but I
Right.
mean, in other words, are there any little techniques you have discovered for yourself, even if it's just like crying or something, where you feel like, okay, I don't know what it's about yet. How am I
Well, I'll
going to
tell
get
you,
there?
the Bernie Mac show was the hardest thing I'd ever written at the time. I'd always kind of pushed myself to go to the next level whenever felt like I was in a rut or something. And the Bernie Mac show, I felt, was the very first show that was a personal show for me. You know, it was really about me, you know, when I was writing it. And, I mean, my parents had divorced when I was kind of young, and so the story from the kids' point of view, I was very much relating to writing from my perspective. And Bernie taking care of the kids was very much my point of view. I had young kids at the time. And the problems that Jordan, my son, was going through. The youngest daughter on the show, Brianna, was kind of my daughter. And the oldest girl was my older sister, all kind of based on them from an emotional point of view. So it was very hard for me to write just very personal like that. And it was hard for me to catch the tone of the show. And I've told this story before. Where it took me, and I am not lying about this, 5 weeks. I wrote the same 3 pages for like 5 weeks, 4.5, the same 3 pages, because it took me that long to get old sitcom rhythm out of my head. And I just couldn't write. I get to the 3rd page and I go, fuck.
Because that was kind of your bag of tricks where you felt comfortable.
I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the tone. I didn't know where I was going. And then I'm like, why the fuck did I pitch this? I can't write it. It's unwritable. It's completely unwritable, this big monster that I pitched, you know. Why did I want to do this?
And you're saying it was partly your self-consciousness that it was so true to your life?
That and the tone had to be very different. It was very realistic in tone. It had to be written in a way that I had not quite written before.
Right.
So I had a deal with Disney that had expired like a year before, but I kept the office in the lot. So I was like,
they just didn't notice you.
They didn't know I was there, right? So I was in this Disney office, no assistant. There's boxes in there, and I'm just hiding out in there, trying to write this script, and you know, still getting on the lot. Hey, how's it going, guys? You know? I'd go to the commissary, so guilty, and I'd see people I know. Hey, Larry, how's it going? Okay, I should be writing right now. I would go a whole week without writing anything, and I literally did cry a couple of times. Once I actually did bang my head up against the wall and went, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know, 3 pages, throw it away. 3 pages, throw it away.
And was it the same scene, or did you
the same fucking scene?
And you knew it had to be that
3
scene.
pages,
You never
yes.
thought, well, maybe this is the wrong scene.
It wasn't that I was doing the wrong scene. I was writing the wrong tone. I was not writing the show. I did not have it, you know, and I could not find it. And then one day I was just writing it and just completely defeated, you know. I think I had given up fighting at this point. And I've got this is the other thing. And please never take my advice on how to deal with the networks and the studios, okay? Keep in mind, I was fired from the show. So never take my advice in this. But I never do things in the time that they want me to do it, and it's very frustrating to them. But I always say it's done when I'm finished, you know. When is it going to be done?
Oh, yeah, that
When
was
I'm
the other
finished.
thing we were talking about the other day, because Larry's working on a book, and he was writing over deadline.
Which I should be writing right now.
Really, which you should be writing right
This
now.
is my
And I am
procrastination.
like a month behind on this NBC pilot. A month behind, like even starting. So I said to Larry, well, you know what? What I realized a long time ago is there's nothing they can do.
Right.
There's nothing they can do.
That actually helped me the other day. When you
Oh
said
yeah.
that.
Well, they can complain. They can freak out.
Right.
But we have the power because there's nothing that
They
they can
can't
do.
come
And
to
as
your
long
house and
as
take
long
it
as
out
you're
of your-
willing to sit with the discomfort of someone else being really
Right.
unhappy with you,
Good luck.
well,
We're writers.
It's
not
really
easy
hard.
for us.
That's super hard
It's
for me.
very hard. Very hard for me. So
So you're utterly defeated.
utterly defeated, right? All my defenses are down, which is probably good, you know. And one day I wrote the 4th page, you know, and I was like, wow, you know, and it suddenly hit, you know, what it was, you know, what the show was, and I wrote the entire pilot in 3 days. It just poured out of me. 3 days, that was it. Just poured right out, you know, and that was it. And every scene just poured right out, just kept going.
and
kept
did you
going, kept going.
use a lot of stuff like that you'd had, but you were going, I don't know how to make this in the tone. In other words, you had all this stuff, or you got a bunch
Once
of new
I had
ideas?
it, once I had it, I had it. And it's funny that I relayed this to the writers on staff when we started. I had to tell them this story because they had to get to where I was, but we didn't have the luxury of having 5 weeks for them to do it, right? So I had to get them there in a different way, you know.
How did you do that?
Oh boy, just really talking to them about the specifics of how to do it. And once you get there, you really change. You can't go back the other way as a writer, you know, because you're kind of changed fundamentally. It's real. This is going to sound real esoteric, but it's funny. It's a certain process of getting to and recognizing something and just trusting it and going, and that's what happens, you know. And so anyhow, it just poured out of me, and you know, and that was pretty much the script that, you know, did it, I guess.
And then Bernie Mac was pleased with the script. Did he have a lot of notes? I
Well,
mean,
you
how
know,
much was he involved in the?
He wasn't involved with the story at all. When I went to Chicago for a couple of days because I wasn't interested in the actual story of the kids at all. That didn't interest me. I wanted to know about him personally because that's what I was going to write, was who he was.
Oh, you mean you
know.
went and you were going to sort of soak him in and
Correct.
and hang with him
That's
and hear
right.
his rhythms?
Hear his rhythms and all
Right.
that stuff, right? As a person, because here's what I thought. I figured this out way ahead of time, and I needed it later on, which was good. Another reason why I made this single camera, I made it for 2 reasons. One reason was because of the style of the show, of course. You know, I wanted to do all these things, you know, stylistically that you could only do single camera. And I'm thinking of other things as I'm talking. That's why I'm pausing. Because I'll go on a side note real quick. In fact, when we were producing it, Ken Kwapis, who directed it, I tend to talk a lot, you know, with directors and actors and that kind of thing, and trying to get to know them in a kind of a different way. But with Ken, I had to sit down and watch some of the old French New Wave stuff, some Godard, and I remember watching Breathless and 400 Blows or something, because I was interested in that kind of cutting style for the show. I thought I really want a style that was kind of surprising. Like we weren't sure, it kind of throws us off, you know. Like it's more than it feels like we're eavesdropping. I want to be thrown off kilter a little bit. And in fact, in the script, I wrote a couple of things on purpose to do that. I'll give you an example. One was where Bernie's talking to us, something's going on, and he hears Jordan off camera or something, and he leaves. But the camera stays there.
When
you
he was
know.
peeing in the other room, I think.
When he's
Yeah,
peeing
exactly.
in the drugstore?
No,
No,
in the
this is
house.
yeah.
The camera stays in the empty hallway, and
Right.
then there's like a
Well,
title with an
on,
arrow.
first it stays on Bernie's empty chair, and it stays a little too long. And in my mind, it was because they didn't know Bernie was leaving.
Right,
You know, was the way that I thought of it. So, and then they got to the hallway just a little too soon. You know, they didn't know when he was coming. You know, that's the feel that I wanted. Like, so the house almost became a character too in some ways. You know, it was real interesting. And then we got back just a hair too soon, and he came in. You know, and that's the feel that I wanted. In fact, when we would shoot it, many times I'd talk to the Steadicam operator, and he was kind of doing a back and forth pan of the characters, and I said, your move is happening too soon. You know, you're going back and forth on their lines. How do you know they're going to respond? How do you know that? You don't. So you have to go a beat after they start talking. You're going too soon, you know.
So like the reality show.
That's right. Or just don't anticipate it. Be in the moment. You know, shoot it in the moment. Don't anticipate that they're going to say something.
Right.
You know, so it's more a moment to moment. So that's what we're going for. And so it's funny. Ken and I are watching new wave films, you know, to do the Bernie Mac pilot. So anyhow, I knew that it had to be a single camera show for many of those reasons. And the other point on that was...
You were going to say that you went to Chicago
Right,
to
right,
hang out
okay.
with Bernie Mac.
The other thing was, it couldn't be in front of an audience for even better reason, though, was that Bernie on stage is so funny, and I can't say motherfucker on Fox, you know? I mean, I can't compete with that Bernie Mac, you know?
Right.
If I'm in front of a studio audience, it's only going to be watered down from the way they experience him on stage, I felt. You know, of course, it has been done with other comedians. Probably Roseanne is the best example of it being really successful, just distilling her attitude, you know, for that. But the fact that she did dirty jokes on stage, like a lot of people don't even know that she had a real dirty act, you know. Not dirty, but, I mean, it wasn't clean, let's put it like that. Even though, but the stuff you remember is her Tonight Show stuff, talking about the couch and everything. But Roseanne was dirty. And so were a lot of comedians, but, you know, they do a clean act on TV, you know. But Bernie it's different. Nowadays, it's different. People watch cable more, and Bernie came up through Def Comedy Jam, Kings of Comedy. He's known for that style. It's different than him just doing a Tonight Show spot.
Right.
So I knew I could not compete with that Bernie Mac. I had to do a different Bernie Mac. So I wanted to be more intimate. Not the outside Bernie, but I wanted people to know what was in here. This story. So I asked Bernie stories about his childhood, and I invited some of his friends to come to hang out with us. We smoked cigars. And I barely talked to Bernie. I asked all them questions about him and their opinions of him and growing up with him and all kinds of stuff, I just wanted to get his rhythm, who he was, and all that stuff as a person. And only for emotional research, not for anything I would ever use story-wise.
Right. So it wasn't about facts that you were going to make
right.
stories. It
Right.
was I have done this myself. Absolutely. It's really interesting to me to hear another writer say it, because I don't think we've really talked about that this much in this, but I have totally done that, and it's almost like you want someone to wash over you, and you want to feel that feeling of that whole person.
Right.
And it's so important when you're tailoring a part to an artist.
Right.
Right. These two words just popped into my head. Emotional vampire. Because sometimes I feel like I'm,
Right.
You get hungry for blood, and you're
Right.
just like walking around, and sometimes I just want to, suck the blood out of strangers.
Right.
Like
You have to
somebody's
sometimes, yeah.
interesting, or there's a bit or whatever.
Right.
Pardon me? What did you say?
No, so you have to sometimes, yeah.
But also in a situation like that, you really are there, to get that running through your veins, so
Right.
you can go back. And it's also scary.
That's what I write. I
It's
write
like-
in their voice. I'm sitting down going, oh, my, when I'm doing his voice, because everything
You
I'm
talk
gonna,
out loud when you write?
Sometimes. If I'm coming up with bits or that kind of thing, or if, sometimes I'll get up and I'll act something out in front of the writers, And in fact, when I pitched the show, I acted out some of the scenes in my head, Bernie running down the hall and that kind of stuff, that I already had some of those worked out, because I wanted.
Do you have the thing about don't touch my stuff?
Yeah, I think I had that worked out.
That's
Yeah.
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
thanks.
just so much about that I loved, because to me it had this wonderful combination of, it's a classic comedy setup in a way. In other
Yeah.
words, you say, don't touch this, don't touch that, don't touch that, don't you
Right.
touch that. It's a classic setup. Then the person goes, can I touch that? No.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Didn't
like,
even get,
like
can I
that's a-
touch? No.
yeah,
Right,
but that's
exactly.
like a setup of a classic nature to me, but yet it was also so in the moment.
Right.
You could picture that organically he'd be so threatened, so emotionally threatened by these three little kids. He had to make his boundary.
Right.
So it was like both.
Well, it is, I don't negotiate with terrorists.
Right. And Bernie, plus his concern in the beginning are these superficial physical things. He's concerned about these records. He doesn't realize they're going to trespass on his emotional life. That's what they're about to trespass on. And he's concerned about this stuff, and so he's surprised that's not what he should have been protecting the whole time, So that's what I'm kind of going for in there too, that the revelation, the discovery that's what's happening here is not all this stuff.
Well, I also thought what was interesting too, and I find this is common in all good writing, is the sleight of hand. We're going to act like we're talking about don't touch my stuff.
Right.
But what's going to happen is that's going to be the emotional moment, which now he can write without being on the nose.
Right.
And it's when the little girl comes in, and it's just such a brilliant exchange. And she's, it's the middle of the night, and she's so cute. And she's like, I'm scared. What's wrong, sweetie? I'm scared, Uncle Bernie. Of what? You.
Right. Exactly.
And she broke some of his stuff, and that touches him. So they never say, oh, I'm really glad you came out here after all. I love you.
Never did any
You
of
see
that.
the look on his face. He's talking about something completely different. And we've talked, for those of you who've been here for the series, we've talked about subtext. That's a perfect example of subtext. But then Winnie pointed this out too. And again, this gives the audience the space to feel that the whole conversation about, can I call you Uncle Daddy? Now, in a regular sitcom,
A lesser writer.
a lesser
say.
writer would say, all right, grouchy.
Yeah, you can
All right,
call
you can call me Uncle Daddy. He's like, No, Call Me Uncle Bernie,
Right,
which
that's
was
my
both
name, right.
funny, but at the same time he was behaving in a loving way.
He
Right.
was
Also,
turning into a
he
daddy.
was not ready for Uncle Daddy yet.
Right.
He was not
Yeah.
ready for that
Right.
yet. That's what I felt. In fact, one thing that helped me write those acts too was the other thing that I wanted to do is I gave each act an emotional cue for me, and that's what each act was about, as opposed to, somebody breaks something in the beginning, and the episode is to find out who broke it, right? So
That's plot driven.
correct. So, like I said, so I threw the plot out, and the only plot in this is Bernie picks up the kids and brings them home. That's about it. You know, Bernie realizes he has to take care of his sister's kids. He goes and gets them, and he brings them home, and that's really about it for the plot. And but I wanted to have each act represent a little different thing, and that's what I kind of did in the series, and it drove the network crazy, by the way.
What? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So the first act was called Mr. Bernie Mac, and that was the introduction. And there I think I have the crib in the
Yep.
notes, because I had a different idea, but it became Mr. Bernie Mac, where, since it is a pilot, we needed an introduction to Bernie and kind of who he is, and lighting that cigar was kind of a symbol of Bernie's kingdom and the world, and just getting to know Bernie. And
But didn't the pilot begin with some line like, I'm going to kill those kids?
that was after he talked about his cigar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the first line is, "Damn, that's a good cigar," and something like that. So the second act was called the River Jordan, I think, where everything kind of just goes wrong, and he's just trying to keep it together. And the third act was Uncle Daddy, where he realizes that there's something bigger going on here that he's going to have to deal with, but he's just not quite ready. And I figured those are the three acts that I would write, and I figured, let me just come up with circumstances to kind of express that and don't worry about the plot. That's basically what I did. And so,
So
the first act was easy. It was just picking them up and bringing them home. The second act, I thought, let me just keep it very simple. Okay, he's got to bring him home. What could happen with Jordan? Well, he could get sick. Bernie could maybe have to go get his medicine, and maybe he gets the wrong medicine. He could find out something about Camille, and maybe he's up all night with Jordan taking care of him. That could be simple enough. I could dramatize that. I just kept it as simple as I could. And I just wanted to do normal things that he would do, not complicated. And the third act, I thought of in just more purely emotional terms. I thought that should be more of Camille's act, where she kind of asserts herself that I'm going to be a force you're going to have to deal with, and that's going to be a challenge to him, and how's he going to deal with that? And I figured out, it took some figuring out, but I thought, boy, a good way to show that is Bernie maybe playing poker, and she just comes in and kind of invades that space, and that kind of starts their thing, And then, of course, you end it with him realizing, this is going to, or coming back to the beginning and say, I told you, America. And so that's what I thought I would go with, was to keep it that simple. And it's funny, I had so many fights with the network, not for the pilot, because, this is what I wanted to say earlier.
Was Gail Berman president of the network?
He was
by
president.
then?
But-
Larry, there's water right there.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you.
that's right.
No, look. Yeah, there's a lot more.
More water.
That's
I'll
just
get some
like-
more.
We are not just interviewers, we're hostesses.
Appreciate it. Yeah. WGA water has no label. I love that.
Fine,
Yeah.
it's a very good
There's also WGA
AMPTP
Foundation water,
water.
yeah.
amazing little water.
Thank you. So, this was what I was gonna say about don't do what I do in terms of the network and studio. So, after I pitched the pilot, I went into hiding pretty much. I never pitched them an outline. I never turned in an outline, anything like that. Anytime they would call me about it, I would just wait to call them back or that kind of thing, or just not return the call, or just say I was working it or whatever. And then it finally got too late, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really didn't. I couldn't give them a detailed scene-by-scene outline. I could not do that. I knew I had to find that in the writing.
But that's one of the, among all of the other things that we could complain about for the
Right.
next 3 hours, one
Right.
of the stupidest things about the
Right.
system is it's become, we never used to have do outlines.
Right.
We would verbally pitch the story. We
Right.
would do an internal
Which is what I
outline.
like, right.
But then if things evolve, you have to find the story, but they want an outline.
Right.
Then they give you notes on that, and then you're supposed to stick to the outline, even though you're saying, I'm giving you a gift.
Right.
It's going to be better than this.
That's how I felt. And it would have been a disaster had I tried to do that, and I knew that, so I just kind of hid out. And you know what? At the time, I don't think they expected much from it, to be honest with you. They were developing something for Judd Apatow. What was his show?
The Undeclared?
Undeclared. That was really big on the list. 24 was being developed at the time. And mine was really under the radar. Nobody even cared about the Bernie Mac show. You know.
And that can be a positive.
Oh, it was a big positive because I didn't talk to anybody. I just hit out. And finally, I just told the people at Regency, I said, you know, this first draft, I'll do kind of an outline draft. It'll be, and I might have written an outline draft on it, you know, but I knew I just wanted to write it, you know. So that's basically what happened when I turned, and then they loved it so much when I did it, you know, that was the first draft. So, but
weren't you saying though that
the network?
Yeah, the network. Weren't you saying that you had a fight with the network? I mean,
well, during the running of the show, they never got what I was doing in terms of how I was telling the stories that I was. And
really, a network didn't understand.
But each show, I would change kind of some of our little rules depending on what our story was. I let our show kind of be story driven. Whatever the story was, kind of dictated our tone for that particular episode.
And by story, you mean the emotional story?
Yeah, whatever that was. And the one they hated the most was one called Hot, Hot, Hot. And it was just a show where it was hot and Bernie was at home, stuck at home with the kids. That was it. And that was one of my favorite episodes. And in fact, I heard from so many people that they loved that episode. And I think the first act was, let's see, I know the second act was called, I think, Punishment, and the third act was called Funishment or something like that. Like Bernie learned to have fun by punishing the kids, I think. Became that episode, you know. And it was so much fun.
Think it troubled them how few things happen?
Couldn't give notes. It frustrated them. I remember Sandy Grushow lecturing to me about how to write comedy. He said, well, you see, Larry, usually something happens in the first act. And when we come in the third act, we call back to that and it's resolved, you know. And I said,
you're like, oh my God.
So here's what I said, and I said this in front of everybody. I said, so what you're saying, Sandy, is what I do is unpredictable. And he goes, yes. And I go, that's what I like to do.
Thank you.
I said, and I kind of like that it's unpredictable, that you don't know where it's going to go. In fact, I came up with a good term for some of the writing that I was pushing on the actors for us to do. One of them was called the inevitable non sequitur. Was a term that I came up with. And the inevitable non sequitur is when something unexpected happens in the moment, but in retrospect, it could only have happened that way. So in the moment, it's a surprise, but in retrospect, it could only have happened that way. So it's different from just a random surprise or non sequitur shock, you know, or that kind of thing.
Is there one of those in the pilot? Yeah.
Yes, there's completely one. When Camille comes in and says, I'm sorry, you know.
Right.
It's a complete surprise.
It comes from absolutely
complete
nowhere.
Surprise. In retrospect, it could only have happened that way. It is the only thing that could have given Bernie Mac satisfaction in that pilot. It is the only resolution to that story, is her apologizing to him, not the other way around. It's the only way he can resolve. With the way she mouthed off to him and all the stuff that happened, the only way Bernie's redeemed in this pilot is that little girl saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and what's really hitting me is, it's funny, now I'm just realizing that organically, it's the only thing, it makes total organic emotional sense from her point of view. In other words, she's got a chip on her shoulder, but she's known the entire time in her heart that she's really lucky to be with Bernie and his wife. And she knows in her heart that this is hard for them, and that they're all really, that the three of them, the three kids, are super lucky to have this little safe haven. So even though she's angry, it makes sense emotionally that she would not want to lose that little haven that she's found.
And actually what I went for was actually even simpler. I went for that Wanda told her to do it.
Oh, I never even thought of that.
Because
we see her sort of tell her, right?
And it sets up a relationship for them, which I thought would be important for the series. You know? So it serves two purposes. You know, she gets to resolve the pilot, and we also set up something that we're going to come back to. And also, it creates something, it gives Camille more strength, too, that I think what you're saying is correct, but I don't think she's there yet at that point. She has to be
pushed.
That's correct, because she's just as stubborn as Bernie is. They're the same.
Right.
You know, coming
They're
from
related.
That's right. And she doesn't give him the pleasure of answering. She says, I'm sorry, and then he looks surprised, and then he looks back and she's gone. So she doesn't even give him a chance to gloat or anything. It's like she did it because she did it for Wanda, and that's why I cut to her giving her, you know.
in the hallway.
Right.
I want to get back to the whole journey with the network, but I want to ask you one question before
Sure.
I forget it. What was
I hope this doesn't sound too weird and all this stuff.
no?
but
Trust
I really
me,
went through all this
this
stuff. going-
whole series of classes for people who have been here is it every night is this weird, right? And this isn't even weird.
No,
Right.
This is what this class is.
It's kind of a class in like what really happened and how
What it's really
and how
like
you
to
live
be a
through
writer.
it.
Right.
How you live through
Right.
it.
I before I forget though, I want to ask, what the deal was with the homeless guy. Because you've only got so many minutes, and every minute is precious. And Larry is talking about how, these little moments serve
Right.
15 different purposes.
Right.
It sets up the relationship with Wanda.
That's
Everything
right.
is set through, and then you've got this long thing with the homeless guy.
Right.
So tell me what the thought was, and
Sure, absolutely. And the other moment like that is the guy in the airport asking for Bernie's autograph. So it was very important that Bernie is a star. That he
so that was about that.
yes, that he does get recognized. And that he is a professional comedian, and that he can be funny like a professional comedian. And that was an actual Bernie joke. It still tastes the same. That's an actual Bernie joke. So I thought it'd be great to put that in the pilot. I think there are two, maybe three. There's three actual Bernie jokes in the show. Bust your head to the white meat shows is Bernie's. Still tastes the same, and if it don't apply, let it fly, which I think I kept in there. Yeah, I think that's still in there.
Okay, well that's a good answer. 'Cause
Yeah,
I was
it
like,
was to show him
Yeah.
who Bernie is to the world. This is who Bernie is.
But it was also fun. Like you're really waiting for him to just be an asshole to everybody,
Right.
And just he's not going to give that guy any money. Just like
Exactly.
how is he not going to give him
Right.
any money?
Right.
But I want to go back to this whole dynamic with
That
the
guy is
network
funny, too.
because
Go
the
ahead.
show did really well right out of
Yes,
the gate. Great
absolutely.
reviews.
Yep.
You did win an Emmy for the pilot.
Yeah, that was in the second year for the first year, right?
But here's this show. It's doing really well for Fox.
Right.
It's counterintuitive that they would give you a hard time.
Right. Well, it started in the beginning. A lot of it was ego, really. They just don't like to lose arguments, That's what I thought because I just didn't understand it, to be honest with you. And there were three major battles I had to fight early on, and I had to fight each one differently. It's important, like when you're running a show, which is a completely different brain function than writing, which can make the writing really difficult sometimes because you have to put that brain on, is you have to battle with them, and you have to figure out different tools in order to get what you desperately can't lose, and figure out the things that you can. But there were three things that they fought me on that I knew I couldn't lose those battles, so I had to find different ways to fight them. The first one was they wanted to recast Camille and Jeremy, the two kids. And that just broke my heart. I was like, these kids are fantastic. How could they want to recast them? I
Right.
just couldn't get that. And I figured
So you just said no?
I figured I could win that one, but I kind of used Bernie too, and I had him speak up for it. I did it pretty cleverly. It came up. I knew it was going to come up at a meeting that we were going to have, and I had Bernie call in on his cell phone and join the meeting in progress because I wanted him to hear that, And so as soon as he heard it, he just said, "Oh no, are you kidding me?" Blah blah blah. And
Did you tell him to do that? Or?
yeah, I gave him a heads
Yeah.
up. Yeah, I gave him a heads up.
Yeah, I've done that before too, where you just really have to orchestrate
Yeah.
all this stuff and
Right.
yeah.
So I first made a kind of a case for them, and Bernie, and they're not going to go against what 800-pound gorilla. So that one wasn't that hard. Second one was a lot harder. They accepted the fact that it was single camera. And by the way, when I wrote the pilot, I consciously wrote directing I wrote it very visual on purpose. Pete Aronson said, "Larry, write it as visual as you can because those motherfuckers are going to want to make this a 3-camera show,
Right.
and you better write it as single camera as you can." So I put that in my head. And but even after all that, and even after it was shot, even before it was shot, they wanted to make it multi-camera. And even after it was shot, what they wanted to do was maybe make it a hybrid.
Oh,
Okay?
that word.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hybrid.
And
Hybrid translates to make cheaper, please.
It's like that dramedy.
make it
word.
worse, right?
Make it worse. Have some place where we can
Right.
Annoy you. I always use this metaphor for working with the networks. It's like, and doing a show with the networks, it's like taking a beautiful hike with gnats buzzing around your head.
Right. And
That's it.
and I would say, I just gave you steak. Why do you want hamburger? But so I knew I had to fight this one differently, and I knew it was going to be harder because I just want to fight. This is how they think, I just want they want something because they lost something, right? So I'm like, oh fuck, how am I going to win this? So what they wanted to do was have me do the confessionals in front of an audience because they're thinking. But here's the thing, though, I couldn't completely fault their thinking because think about it. Bernie Mac is hilarious in front of an audience.
Right.
You would want him in front of an audience. It completely makes sense. A comic that dynamic, and think about all the successful comedy shows have had really dynamic performers in front of an audience. Why would you not want that, right? That's their point of view. My point of view, of course, was I can't compete with motherfucker with that Bernie. Right? I knew why it had to be single camera and everything else. So I had to.
But Larry, you didn't say that to them?
No, they wouldn't have bought it. It didn't make. They weren't interested in that. Okay.
Right.
I had to come
'Cause
up.
that's too artistic.
It makes too much sense.
Right.
I'd already made that argument, but they didn't care about that, and they were insisting on it, And when the network and they made it an issue that they wouldn't pick up the show unless I agreed to do that.
Wow.
Oh, that's
So
fun.
This is how adamant they were. So I said, I tell you what, let me try it, okay? That's what I said. I didn't quite say yes. And in the meantime, I'm just buying time trying to figure out what the fuck am I going to do,
Where was Regency in all this? Were they supportive of you or just
supportive, but there wasn't much they could do, I mean, it's tough getting a show on the air, as you know, and there's a lot of bargaining.
I have heard that.
Yeah, and all that stuff. So, so I said, I'll try it. I'll see what I can do. That was the best answer I could give them. I didn't say I would. I said, I'll see what I can do, And that was good enough for them at the time, thank God. So anyhow, when push came to shove, what I did was I just lied. And here's what I said. I made up something that Bernie, and I can't remember what it was. This is how great a lie it was that I actually forgot it, too. But it was something about either he was self-conscious about memorizing lines or reading or stuttering or something, and it made him very angry, and he didn't want to do this in front of an audience.
You just lied.
But it was a personal thing that he would have been embarrassed and had some shame about or something. And I made them feel like they would put him in an awkward position if he was going to do that. And they were like, oh, no, we wouldn't want to do that, And I would go, yeah.
This takes as much creativity as writing.
Oh, it was brilliant. When I came up with it, I was like, oh, I
brilliant.
got it. And it was just an out-and-out lie. It was just an out-and-out
Now,
lie.
did you share these things with the
I never
writers?
told Bernie that.
You never told Bernie, but
I think
did
I
you?
told Pete Aronson. I think. I may not have. I may have just kept it to myself, Because I told it wasn't true. And the last one was the toughest one. No way I was going to win the last one. Sandy Grushow, and now this comes from Sandy, okay? He's like, fuck this, I got to get something.
He was the
He was the
president
head
of the
Fox, right.
network at the time.
He wanted me to reshoot the whole first act, okay? He just thought it didn't work. And he hated the office scene. He thought Bernie was too mean. And he didn't think any other show was funny, okay? So he said, you're going to have to reshoot the first act. And I said, I have no idea what to reshoot. This is the best work I've ever done in my life. I said, I don't know what to redo. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to fight this because he really wants me to do this. And I don't know what I'm going to do,
It's so depressing when you feel like you've achieved something that you
Right.
want to achieve and you just want everyone to go, it's so brilliant. I love your baby. It's the cutest baby ever. And it's like so depressing when someone doesn't get it and they want to ruin it.
And Robin, and I knew they were going to really force me to do this because I had won those other two.
Right.
Now it's 2-0, So I thought, God, I got to figure out the best. How am I going to do this? Okay, I already lied. Can't do that. Yeah, I can't use Bernie this time because he really has no opinion about this type of thing. It was a little more technical. And I didn't want to reshoot any of it. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to stall. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to stall and wait till it's too late to do it. And what I'm going to do, basically like the Cuban Missile Crisis, I'm going to ignore the first letter and respond to the second letter. Or ignore the second letter, respond to the first, whatever that was. But so I whenever we would talk on the phone, I would talk about the shows we were producing, and I would forget to talk about the pilot, Or
But you were already in production.
we had just started production in July. So he He told me he wanted to reshoot it in July, okay? So we were starting to write at that point. So I figured out if I can hold off, if I can stall through October,
They have to put it on the air.
they have to put it on the air. They have no choice. We were going to premiere in November. But I knew it was going to do some taking, it was going to do some doing to do that. So I just did whatever I could to stall, didn't bring it up. If they brought it up, I talk about it a little bit, and then I get distracted by a current problem, a current story, that sort of thing. I bring up casting, which they love talking about casting. And whatever would distract them, like shiny little objects. Ooh, yeah, that's great.
Haley's Comet.
Yeah. Exactly. I would just bring it up, and then we got to about a month before the pilot, and I got this email from Regency, and they said, Sandy wants to know what's going on with the pilot. How come it hasn't been reshot? And I was like, fuck. Because there was still enough time technically to do it, And I was like, somehow I got to stall 2 more weeks.
I love how you're such a madman that it's like it never occurs to you to just do it.
I know. Because there was no way I was going to do
Never
it.
an option.
It's not an option.
But
Doing
Larry,
it was never an option.
Can I ask you this? And I do want to hear the outcome, but can I ask you this? On some level, was this
so
fun for you?
hardcore.
It's so funny.
On some level,
Hiding in the bushes.
but Larry,
folks.
on some level,
Sorry.
on some level, was this fun for you? Because one of the things that I find
It's terrifying.
It
I
is
thought they were going to ruin
terrifying.
my show, so it was terrifying.
well, it is terrifying,
Also
but on
fun.
some level, I
was
just
fun
like to
ducking about
get
a minute, yeah.
around the rules, and I'm just like you.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
contrarian. If someone just says,
Right.
"Don't do this," I'll spend all my
Right.
free time
Exactly.
trying to figure out how I could get around it.
Exactly.
So
that's-
anyway, so there were
yeah.
2 weeks left.
Oh man, so they said you have to call Sandy directly and talk to Sandy. So I was like, oh fuck. So I called him and he said, well, what's going on? I thought we were gonna reshoot this. I said, I know, Sandy. I have no idea what to reshoot. And he goes, well, and so we talked about it. And it was good that I got to talk to him. And I told him that I felt this worked and that worked, but it still wasn't quite enough for him. But I wanted the conversation at least. I got him to at least listen. And so we hung up the phone. And he called Regency and said, I need him to at least reshoot that office scene or something like that. So I waited a week to call back again, or a week and a half. And so then, because whenever they call, I don't have to call them right back.
But you're very busy producing.
I
the
do
show.
that. I don't call my agents right back. People say, my agent hasn't called me. I say, I don't call my agents. Why are you waiting for your agents to
That's
call
why they
me?
That's why they have caller ID.
Yeah, exactly. So I called him back a week and a half later. Now he wanted to have lunch with me, So he took me out to Pinot or something like that, And he says, you have to reshoot this, Larry. You have to. And this is the president of Fox. Keep in mind, it's the president of the network. Okay, it's not even like Regency or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the president. It's beyond Gail and all that. It's right under Peter.
And the
Turner.
show still is not aired.
It has not aired. They can do anything they want at this point. I have no leverage, Robin. None, because the show hasn't
You
performed.
spent a lot of money.
But it hasn't performed.
Right.
Until it performs,
It's an unknown
It's
quantity.
an unknown quantity, right? And to them, it's not very good.
Right. They don't think it's funny.
It's not very good. They've looked at dailies from shows that they haven't liked. They haven't liked any of the episodes they've seen. None of that stuff. They haven't liked anything yet, right? And in fact, Gail was really upset over one episode. She just thought it was horrible, didn't understand it, blah, blah, blah. So I was really in hot water at this point.
Right.
So I just looked across from Sandy at lunch and I said, Sandy, it's too late. Because now there was a week and a half to go, and it really was too late, And I said, I don't have any time. And so he said, well, there's got to be a way we can do something. I said, well, what is the biggest problem for you? And so he finally I got him to pin down his biggest problem. And it was the scene where he said, don't touch this, don't touch that. He thought Bernie was too mean, okay? And to me, that's why it was funny. And so that scene isn't how it was intended. I compromised, and it hurt me so much to do it. But I put in, there was, I think, thinking about cookies or something like that.
Yes.
And it actually hurt the rhythm of it. But it was my compromise to not reshoot. And I actually made a cut to their reaction while he was giving them a tour that I didn't want to do. So there were two things, that and thinking about cookies, which I still hate that because it makes no sense at all at that moment.
But you threw him that bone.
I threw him that bone. I put in something light So it would distract people from the mean or whatever, you
But
know.
it didn't really. I mean, I'll just say as an audience
Yeah.
member, I
Still
know
made me
you can.
laugh.
You hate stuff when it's yours,
Right.
and you remember every painful compromise. But it really didn't wreck the scene. I
Yeah,
hate to
because
say
he
it.
was so powerful in what he was doing, but it had a certain rhythm before that was just fucking awesome.
I thought
mean,
it was a classic.
It was
rhythm.
just
Yeah.
solid, you know, and that hurt it it hurt it a bit. But if you had never seen it, you never would have known, you know. But if you had seen it, you would have went, oh, well, that was a little jarring, you know, because it takes you out. I didn't want to take somebody out. I wanted to keep them in,
Right.
you know.
I mean, I feel like this is leading up to me wanting to say to you, that whole mentality is, to me, like an incredibly valuable asset. There's a level, what you're describing about yourself, that there's a kind of an, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this in any way critically, but there's a kind of an arrogance in it. You know, there's a kind of a healthy arrogance in it. And it's a kind of thing that in the people I've met who succeed, by succeed, I mean who are able to not just survive, but actually enjoy their careers. There is this sort of level of, in the end, they need to please themselves, and they need that much more than, you know. And it's interesting because I'm a people pleaser, definitely, big time.
Yeah, but you
But
were.
I still have that way about me when I'm doing my writing, where it's like I really have to please myself, and I really have a kind of a low level of interest
Right.
about not the audience. The audience is different. I'm very interested in them, but about those people we deal with.
Well, it's interesting because as a writer, I don't. As a producer, I have more of an ego than I do as a writer. As a writer, I'm very more concerned about what people may think, and you know, you would probably be able to convince me to cut something quicker if I'm just writing it, or like I told Ken, I thought I wasn't sure about a couple of scenes. He says, "God, no, we're gonna shoot. That's fantastic." I was like, "Really? Okay." So I have a very low
But at least
self-esteem.
you respected the people you listen to. If
Yes.
you don't respect them, it's
No,
not
absolutely.
harder
I listen to, I don't care who's pitching, I listen to everything. I have a very low self-image as a writer, but as a producer, I will fight to the end for something. You know, I'm a tiger as a producer, you know. It's like, don't get in the way of my people, don't fuck with this, you know. So I can defend very well as a producer, but as a writer, I'm a little more withdrawn, you know, because I don't know, it's just more personal. So, you know, it's a little different. So I did that I protected that as a producer.
You saw yourself as a producer at that point.
Oh, I was producing the show. It had nothing to do with it. Writing was done. Once I wrote the pilot, look, when I wrote the pilot, I was not sure if people were going to like that. I was very unsure. I was surprised when it got the response that it did.
Right.
Because it came out so fast. I thought this has to be just kind of raw and undone. It felt real unpolished, and it was just stuff, you know. So when it got
But you did like it.
no, I did like it, but I didn't have a big opinion of it. I liked it, and I thought it seemed to work, but I didn't know how. I thought there was just as good a chance people might hate it as they might like it. But that's my identity as a writer.
But you know, it's interesting because there's a part of you that was discounting all the time that you'd spent before the 3 days.
Right.
So you could just as
Right,
easily
exactly.
say, I wrote it in, 3 months.
I learned that later. I didn't realize that at the time, but now I realize it. The way that I write is I'm a squirrel. I gather a lot of nuts and stuff and put them in the tree. And one day I look at the tree. How did all those nuts get in there? You know? But
Does it sometimes feel like you're literally just going, I mean, okay, I'm just gonna almost
right.
play around, and none of this is real. And I mean, I'll say that to myself. I'll say, this isn't a real scene. I'm just gonna make up some shit that is not, that I may not even be using this. I mean, it's like
Right.
I have to say a million things to myself to sort of let myself go.
Right.
And then I do something, and it doesn't have to be often it doesn't have to be in scene format.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It can be a big mess, because that signals to my little worried mind that no one's ever going to read this. This
Right.
isn't for real. This is for fun.
Right.
Or this is just to see what it would be like if I pretended I was writing something.
Well, last week, I think I said, this NBC pilot that I'm working on, I started like I started writing finally,
Mm-hmm.
and I was writing this file, and it all felt too important, so I just renamed the file the
Right.
same thing, but with the letters PD for play draft.
Oh, wow.
And I'm still writing my play draft.
Right.
Because then I feel like I'm just playing. I'm not writing the real draft yet. And of course, now I am writing the real draft, but I
Right.
still have to have that PD there.
So is that what you meant by being like a squirrel, or what?
No,
did
no,
you-
no. See, I can't even write the play draft. I will procrastinate so long, and when I write it, it's just about done by the time that I write it. So I write it where it feels very polished. Like I'm writing the book right now. When I write a piece, it's just about done when it comes out the way it comes out the first time, because I figure out as much as I can ahead of time. Because I for some reason, if I try to write it incomplete, I just stop. It's
But
like,
you said I'm like a squirrel. So what are you gathering?
well, I'm
What are
gathering
the-
all the information in my head and where I want to go and what this is and blah. It's all in my
and
head.
it's
yeah.
all like up here,
Right.
and you don't write it even
No,
down.
no. I'll scribble down maybe jokes or big ideas or that kind of thing. But like, I'll tell you the other way that I write is I write ideas on notebook longhand. Like I'll write jokes, I'll write an outline, and any story points. I can only write dialogue on a computer. I can't write dialogue longhand. I just can't
Yeah,
for some reason.
Yeah, I
And
know
I
what you
can't
mean.
write. I can't put notes on the computer. I have to write them out. I have no idea.
That's just weird.
It is weird. So in the gathering stage, I only have a notebook and I'm writing down. But it goes back to my stand-up
Right.
days. When I did
I was
stand-up
gonna say,
comedy,
it reminds me of
I
the-
always used a notebook and I wrote jokes in my notebook and all that stuff. And when I would write for other people, sometimes I wrote for the comics. Like I wrote for this ventriloquist, and it was in dialogue. I always typed it. So
So was stand up was that your beginning of I'm a writer? Was that your
actually, it was in college. I studied playwriting in school, and I was a theater major. And my first gig was at the Mark Taper Forum. I was in their improvisational theater project. And so my first card was an equity card, actually. It was in there. And we wrote a play through improvisation. And so, that was really my beginning to writing. And I would go in auditions as an actor. This is before I even did stand-up, although I tried stand-up earlier. But and I would always ad-lib, lines and stuff, not knowing that this was probably an insult to the people. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that just I got a flashback when I was in the Groundlings, and I was a performer. I wasn't an
Right,
actress.
right.
So they were making this really low budget movie called Hamburger the movie, and I went in for the part of a nun, and they clearly didn't know what they wanted because it was like me and Edie McClurg and
Right.
just the randomest group of people. So I'm reading the sides, and they're really not very good. And without realizing what I'm doing, I'm rewriting the sides.
right.
So I go in, I suck at my audition, and I said, look, if, they didn't have for a nun in a joke about, in a movie about hamburgers, I'm like, you could say they're habit forming. And I'm like, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy, and I'm like, well, I wrote some jokes. Here, cast someone else. But I'm sorry, you were
Right.
saying how you transitioned from,
Yeah.
so you were doing the improvisational thing at the Mark Taper Forum, and you were
Right.
rewriting sides.
and even going to auditions and being an actor.
Yeah, at that point, and I would always kind of change the lines to something that I thought was funnier, not knowing you probably shouldn't do that. And I remember I played a cop in The Facts of Life. This is so far back. And we'd be in a rehearsal, and I'd just ad-lib a line. I didn't know what the protocol was or whatever. And but I realized that you probably shouldn't do that, And that's when I had tried stand-up a couple of times, but I was really intimidated. Now, keep in mind, when I first tried stand-up, I graduated high school in 1979. I remember going up to the Comedy Store at about that time. I used to sneak into the Comedy Store when I was too young to get in, go into the original room. Richard Pryor was in there trying out some material. I'd go into the big room. I saw Letterman emceeing before anybody knew who Letterman was. People like that. I remember I was sitting next to Gilda Radner once, and all these people were huge, and I thought, I can't do this. They're too good, even though I would go on an amateur night and try it and that kind of stuff, but I just couldn't stick with it. And I was a theater major at the time, and it took up a lot of my time, and I was studying acting in Hollywood at the time, too. And but when I turned professional and decided I was really going to do it, I thought, what? I'm going to dedicate myself to stand-up. And I just sat down and really started writing every day. That's when I think, became a writer, is when I did stand-up. I wrote every day, went to amateur night again, now with a renewed sense of, I'm going to do it. And I just never looked back at that point.
What was your act? I mean, was it?
It was a
personal?
hot,
Was it
Personal? Was it your life?
It wasn't personal at all. It was silly. It was a hodgepodge of stuff. I had political stuff. I had one-liners. I had impressions. I had whatever made me laugh. Really was, and I actually did pretty well. The audience it was very entertaining, but it wasn't really a personality type act.
Right, right.
It wasn't that kind of thing.
But you were really just writing and saying it out loud, it sounds like.
Yeah, whatever was funny,
Yeah.
But I would do bits, I remember I did a bit called Black Away, which always made me laugh. It was this stuff you would put in your tongue to take the black out of your voice. You could go on job interviews and that kind of thing. It's like, revolutionary new Black Away works right in the mouth to remove even the most stubborn colloquial slang. And leaves behind clean, articulate wasp intonation. It was that kind of thing. And the audience liked it, it was good. And I would do a bit where I would get a woman on stage and I would just talk to her, yeah, how you doing? And then some music would just start playing. It's like, well, I was going, hi, I'm Reggie Jackson, And I would do this thing like it was the United Way, and it was like, for dating white women. And she was like, what? And we were doing this commercial together. And it was just funny. And then I'd do maybe a bit where I used to do this cherry tree routine, which was one of my favorite routines at the time. This is how long ago it was. But I said every politician lies, The only one that didn't was probably George Washington, right? He told his father asked him if he chopped down the cherry tree. He said yes. And I said, this is how you always set up impressions in those days. I wonder if so-and-so had said it, right? But like if Nixon had talked to his dad, said, Richard, come here. Did you chop down my tree? Daddy, looking in retrospect, I can firmly say, although I did authorize the initial break-in of the tool shed, I must say that in no significant way links me to the actual chopping. And it was that, And that was just for the audience would love it, And then I would do, when I first did it, I did Carter. No, Dad, I didn't chop down, I left it in my heart, or something like that. Or like, well, I don't remember. I don't remember the Reagan thing, but I would end
Clinton, I did not
before Clinton.
chop down that tree, Miss Lewinsky.
Right. He would point or whatever. But I would end it with Jesse Jackson, It's like, Jesse, come here. Did you chop down my tree? Well, Daddy, the question is not whether or not I chopped down your tree, as much as do I believe in the tree's right to exist. On that point, I do. Furthermore, Daddy, I believe in the rights of all trees. I think it is wrong to merely address the plight of the cherry tree alone. There's the apple tree, the fig tree. They have been locked out of the garden. Daddy, we need to include all the trees along with the bushes, along with the grass, in order to form a total shrubbery coalition. That always get a big laugh. And that was my act. I would do that kind of stuff. So it was a hodgepodge. And then, a throwaway joke like I'd say, hey, I should do stand-up again, Robin. That's great. But
What did you say?
you can only do it in something like this. But one of my favorite. Then I started getting a little more absurd a little bit as I went on. Like I would say, my mother thinks everybody's black. Doesn't matter how much it look like. She is black. I'm like, Mom, she is black. I'm like, Mom, look at that hair. I'm like, look at that butt. I'm like, Mom, Barbara Bush is not black. She's not even close. There's not even. I said, but people always ask me what I'm mixed with. They go, and they make that face. Are you mixed with something? And I would say, look, if I was a beer, I'd be a Negro Light. And I am a third less angry than the regular Negro. So it just kind of works. But that was the kind of stuff. So that was the first joke where I thought, boy, I can do race in a more absurd way that kind of works for me. I didn't tackle it. I always gave the audience kind of a parachute out, oh, hey, Larry doesn't care about this stuff.
That's really making me think. Last week, Don Roos, when he was writing Opposite of Sex, it was the first time he really wrote about being a gay man.
Right.
And he created Christina Ricci to be a homophobic character, to take to do it in a different way. So you would be disarming so that you could
Disarm
talk
the
about
audience.
something that was a
Right.
bit taboo. God, there's so much I want to ask you.
You know, it's more taboo now than it was when I was doing stand-up.
Why do you
mean,
think that is?
Well, when I was doing stand-up on the heels of Pryor in the 70s and all that, people were used to hearing about. Richard Pryor had an album called Bicentennial Nigger. You know, that nigger's crazy. In fact, we did a bit on the PJs where they found this old radio station, you know, and the kids found that album, This Nigger's Crazy, or Bicentennial Nigger, and said, hey, Super, can we play this? Just play it. You can't even say it anymore. So it's like that's
you know what's weird is it's almost like when you really think about it now, I mean, Larry David is obsessed with race. Obsessed. But it's hard to think of anybody else who's really even talking about it right now. I have
with race, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will be on my next show. So.
Yes, I know. I can't wait to. I want to watch that show. I know
Also,
you haven't
is
written it
that-
yet. Larry's starring in a show for HBO as soon as he writes
Yeah, I haven't
it.
written it yet.
But Larry, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about what the idea is, and then we want to take a break so you guys can ask questions. Although, to be completely honest, I could ask you questions for about 100 hours.
I'll
But
behave.
but especially if I have a couple cocktails with me.
Exactly.
But yeah, just tell everybody briefly what the
Sure.
HBO show is about, and then we really want you guys to be able to ask Larry questions.
The HBO show is I basically play an Obama-like character running for president, and I'm going to deal with race and politics and just deal with it straight on, not pull any punches, which is why I'm doing it at HBO. And it's called Primarily Colored, is the name of it. And that's pretty much it.
Tell them the
Great.
title of the book that you're writing.
I have a book that I'm writing, which is not really about race. It's more of an absurdist thing that's kind of an offshoot of what I do on The Daily Show. And it's called I'd Rather We Got Casinos and Other Black Thoughts by Larry Wilmore. And it's as if someone had collected my black thoughts over the years and put them in a book. So there's like fake op-eds from newspapers, and like I had a radio show. Like there's one bit that I wrote where I interviewed the man, you know, and the whole interview is I can't get over how charming he is, you know. It's like, you know, he keeps brothers down, but he's such a good guy, you know. He's an unbelievable guy, you know. So that was the whole tone of the thing. And there was another one was like an excerpt from a book that I had written, but this chapter wasn't in the book because the editor kicked it out, and so now I included in this book. All made up, of course, it didn't really happen. And the name of the chapter is It's Okay to Hate Black People That Work at McDonald's at the Airport. It doesn't make you racist. And it's put in galley form, where it has to fight with me and the editors in the in the margins. You can't say that, but it's true, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah. And I invite in a psychologist, and I play a tape for him of me at the McDonald's, and I prove the point to him that they hate me, so I get to hate them. You know, it's just fair. You know? So it's stuff like that. It's real silly stuff. You know.
Let's take a 10-minute
10-minute
break,
break.
and then we will come
That's what I'm
back.
supposed to be writing.
More of Mr. Larry Wilmore. No, you'll write later.